In the 1980s, Nike, like many other companies in the US, made a strategic decision to move its production offshore, seeking cheaper labor to maximize profitability. This shift started as Nike sought to compete more effectively in the rapidly growing sports and apparel market by transferring manufacturing to countries like Vietnam, China, and Indonesia, where labor costs were significantly lower than in the United States. Nike was able to slash production expenses and enhance its profit margins dramatically. This move was pivotal for Nike's growth trajectory, enabling it to produce at lower costs and sell at competitive prices in the global market. However, it also meant the reduction of manufacturing jobs in the US, contributing to the decline of the domestic textile industry that had once provided stable employment to thousands of Americans. Meanwhile, the jobs created in the developing countries often came with minimal wages and challenging working conditions, perpetuating a cycle of economic disparity in those regions. Nike's strategy of offshore production for cost reduction became a classic example of how corporate profit strategies can have profound and sometimes problematic impacts on global labor markets. This pattern is emblematic of a global capitalist system where capital mobility allows companies to maximize profits by leveraging cheaper labor markets overseas. While this has led to massive profits for companies like Nike and affordable products for consumers worldwide, such practices highlight the complex ways in which capitalism, as currently practiced, often breeds poverty by prioritizing profits over equitable economic growth and fair labor standards. Welcome to our deep dive into capitalism, the economic system celebrated for driving unprecedented wealth and technological progress. Yet, it's the same system that's constructed a stark divide between the haves and the have-nots, catapulting some into the stratosphere of wealth, while others languish in the shadows of economic hardship. Today, we're zeroing in on the mechanics of how capitalism not only cultivates vast fortunes, but also perpetuates poverty, affecting millions across both developed and developing nations. We'll dissect the historical origins, scrutinize the current landscape, and analyze the data that reveals the widening gaps between economic classes. By peeling back the layers of economic policies, corporate practices, and global impacts, we aim to uncover the root causes behind the uneven distribution of wealth and opportunities. So, join me as we dive into the facts and figures, exploring the systematic features of capitalism that ensure prosperity for some while securing hardship for others. My name is Mark, and welcome to my channel. I make deep dives into the dark side of money, power, and business, empowering you, my cherished viewer, with all the tools you need to take control of your future. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe, as doing so helps push my content through the YouTube algorithm. Now tap in, and I'll explain.
The company makes the iPads, iPods, and iPhones that has made Apple a commercial and cultural icon. But there are no I workers here, only we workers. And Miss Chen says we work whenever Foxconn says so.
Fast forward to the present day in the US, a country characterized by its extraordinary wealth, juxtaposed with significant levels of poverty. According to the data from the US Census Bureau, approximately 37.2 million Americans, or about 11% of the population, are actively living below the poverty line in 2020. Simultaneously, the federal minimum wage has stagnated at $7.25 per hour since 2009, failing to keep pace with inflation and the cost of living, which has increased significantly over the years. Meanwhile, the compensation packages of CEOs have skyrocketed. Since 1978, CEO pay has surged by an astounding 1,300%, illustrating a sharp escalation in income inequality. This stark contrast in economic fortunes is further highlighted by the performance of the stock market, which often reaches new highs, reflecting gains that largely benefit the wealthiest segments of our society. The S&P 500, for example, has seen substantial growth, primarily enriching those who are already financially well off and have the means to invest. This widening economic chasm is not just a feature, but a fundamental characteristic of modern capitalism, where wealth accumulates at the top, and the financial growth of corporations often does not translate into improved livelihoods for the majority of their workers. Many Americans are employed in jobs that pay wages insufficient to cover basic necessities like housing, healthcare, and education. This systematic issue reflects a deep-seated structural inequality that has become more pronounced, making the economic ladder increasingly difficult to climb. The result is a society where economic mobility is stifled and the promise of the American dream remains elusive for many. The growing gap between the rich and the poor underlines the urgent need for economic policies that address these disparities, ensuring fair wages and a more equitable distribution of wealth.
What the retailers are interested in is getting their clothes produced at the lowest possible price at the quickest possible deadline. It's not about the people inside the industry, it's just about the profit that can be made.
Capitalism's global reach profoundly affects developing countries, a phenomenon which is starkly illustrated by the garment industry in Bangladesh. Here, workers typically earn about $95 a month, laboring in conditions that starkly contrast with the profits that the labor generates. These workers produce clothing and accessories for major international brands, which sell these goods in affluent markets for vastly higher prices, accruing billions in revenue. This severe wage disparity highlights a systemic issue within capitalist practices: the pursuit of minimized production costs and maximized profits, which often result in the exploitation of labor. The situation in Bangladesh echoes the earlier narrative surrounding Nike, which also shifted its production to places where labor was, well, cheap, a strategy that has been widely adopted in global manufacturing. This move is driven by a capitalist imperative to reduce costs and enhance competitiveness in international markets. For companies in developed nations, this strategy effectively boosts profits and shareholder returns. However, it does so by exploiting the economic vulnerabilities of these poorer regions where the labor is originated. For example, sweatshops in Bangladesh are a glaring example of how such strategies impact human lives. These factories, often criticized for poor working conditions, inadequate safety standards, and extremely low wages, epitomize the darker side of global trade under capitalism. Workers in these environments not only face economic hardships, but they also bear significant risks to their health and safety, underscoring a significant moral and ethical issue within the capitalist framework. This exploitation of labor in developing countries for the benefit of wealthier nations maintains a cycle of poverty in these regions. While these practices ensure a steady flow of cheap goods into affluent markets like the US, they also perpetuate global economic inequality. Workers remain trapped in a cycle where they can barely afford basic necessities, let alone improve their living conditions or invest in their futures. By tying this back to the case of Nike, we see a continuous pattern where global brands leverage disparities in global economic status to their advantage. The core issue remains the same: intense capital accumulation at one end and sustained poverty at the other. Such practices not only question the sustainability of such economic strategies, but also call for a critical examination of ethical responsibilities and the long-term impacts of capitalist policies on global inequality. Capitalism frequently exacerbates poverty by reinforcing systemic inequality, a mechanism that disproportionately benefits those who are already possessing capital. This continuous cycle of capital accumulation leads to an increasingly centralized distribution of wealth. The wealthiest 1% of adults globally control a staggering 45% of the world's total wealth, while the bottom half of the global population holds less than 1%. This stark disparity points to a deep-seated structural imbalance within the capitalist system, where the concentration of wealth at the top results in significant control over economic resources, political influence, and social outcomes. This centralization not only perpetuates the status quo, but it also deepens the divisions within these societies. The elites control over a significant portion of our global resources. This limits opportunity for the vast majority of the population, thus constraining their ability to access quality education, obtain secure and well-paying jobs, and honestly achieve any sort of financial stability. Moreover, this concentration of wealth creates barriers to entry in various markets, stifling competition and innovation from new entrants, as well reinforcing a cycle where wealth begets wealth.
But in 2010, the company made unwanted headlines when more than a dozen workers killed themselves, forcing Foxconn to improve its factories. The company tells CNN it boosted pay and provided counselling. Foxconn now boasts of its on-site health care and worker living conditions, which it claims are among the best in China.
In addition, the psychological impact of poverty extends far beyond the immediate financial concerns, deeply affecting mental and emotional health. Living paycheck to paycheck, which is a reality for many Americans, engenders a state of chronic stress that can lead to serious psychological issues such as anxiety, depression, and a diminished capacity to make effective decisions. This continuous stress not only affects mental health, but also has tangible impacts on physical health, leading to a higher incidence of diseases and a lower life expectancy. Data from 2020 highlights that a significant portion of the American workforce lives without the security of financial stability. According to a report by the American Payroll Association, nearly 74% of Americans would find themselves in financial difficulty if their paycheck were delayed by even 1 week. This statistic underscores the precarious financial situations that many people in the US face, where a single unexpected expense can lead to a financial crisis. The American Psychological Association further shows the link between financial insecurity and psychological distress. They note that individuals living in poverty are more likely to experience chronic stress, which is associated with a range of psychological issues, such as anxiety and depression. Chronic stress can impair brain function, particularly in areas related to memory and executive function, which are crucial for planning, problem solving, and emotional regulation. Over time, the constant strain of financial insecurity can lead to decision fatigue, making it harder for individuals to make the choices that can improve their situation, thus perpetuating the cycle of poverty. Moreover, the stress of living paycheck to paycheck can exacerbate family dynamics and strain relationships, leading to more isolated individuals and a fragmented community. Children raised in these conditions are particularly vulnerable. They are more likely to experience developmental delays and poor educational outcomes, which can limit their ability to break out the cycle of poverty as adults in their own lives. Overall, the psychological effects of living in financial insecurity are profound and far-reaching, affecting not only the individuals directly involved, but also the broader social fabric. This underscores the need for comprehensive social policies that address not only the economic issues, but also the psychological dimensions of poverty, aiming to provide stability that can lead to a healthier and more productive lives for all. Addressing the profound issues of inequality and poverty exacerbated by current capitalist structures demands systemic reforms. A spectrum of policy proposals have been put forth which aim to tackle these disparities from various angles. On one end, enhancing labor rights and increasing minimum wages could provide immediate relief to those who are struggling under the burden of low pay and poor working conditions. Such measures can help ensure that workers receive a fair share of the wealth that they help create and establish a safety net that prevents the most vulnerable from falling into poverty. The more ambitious proposals, like the introduction of a universal basic income, or UBI, represent a transformative approach to rethinking welfare systems. UBI involves providing all citizens with a regular, unconditional sum of money, regardless of other income. This could radically reduce poverty levels in the US by ensuring that everyone has enough to cover basic living expenses, thereby reducing stress and anxiety associated with financial insecurity. Beyond these specific policy proposals, creating a more equitable economic system requires a fundamental shift in how wealth and resources are distributed and managed. This involves reevaluating tax systems, strengthening regulations on corporate behavior, and investing in public services that elevate the entire society, such as education, healthcare, and public infrastructure. Capitalism, as a dominant economic system, is likely to remain for the foreseeable future. However, its current trajectory, which often prioritizes profits over people, is simply unsustainable. If we aim to foster a just society, understanding the flaws within capitalism is essential, not for its elimination, but for its evolution. By recognizing these shortcomings, we can work towards a capitalist system that is inclusive and beneficial to all. The objective isn't to dismantle capitalism, but to refine the model so its economic growth leads to broad-based benefits, not just for a select few, but for every member of society. In conclusion, while the challenges are significant, the possibility of a fair and more equitable system is within reach. Through thoughtful reforms and collective will, we the people can transform capitalism into a force that uplifts everyone, contributing to a more stable and equitable world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into capitalism, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. These videos take quite a while to write, produce, and edit, so your engagement is greatly appreciated. And as always, I've been Mark, and you've been great. Stay dangerous, and I'll see you in the next one.